All right, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We've got an audience across the continent, coast to coast today, and a big welcome to you from here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I know we've got a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, but if you are new to us as a class or as a speaker perhaps today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world, and everything we do goes to our YouTube channel. So if you want to watch this program in like 3 weeks, or in like 3 years, if you want to watch over 3,000 other programs, they are all right there to peruse. So much to explore and discover. And a big thank you to all our students and teachers today for joining us as we continue to showcase and celebrate the coolest scientists and explorers on planet Earth. It's really, I pinch myself daily. I have the luckiest job in the world. Now, today, we are continuing on with an epic series in conjunction with Western U Space. You can check out their website below. Just last week, we hung out with Hira Nadine talking about some really incredible stuff that she's up to, having just finished her master's thesis. And today, we're going to another just recent master's thesis congratulatory person. So a big, for our students that are in grade 4, you do not know in your lives how exciting it is to finish off a master's thesis, but it is a really, really big deal. So a big kudos to Katie Hutton joining us today, who's going to talk with us about robots, AI, and space exploration. For the kids who didn't know, this is the coolest time to ever be interested in space ever, period, in the history of man. We are doing more missions, more places. We're going back to the moon. We're going to Mars. We've got robotic probes going across the solar system and beyond. And we're building like a moon base, both in orbit and hopefully on the moon in not too long as well. Now, AI is going to play a big part in that, and Katie Hutton today is going to talk to us a little bit about the changing world of AI, how it gets involved in all these amazing new space missions and beyond, and she's going to share a little bit about her enthusiasm for space generally and her career path. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Katie. Thank you so much for joining us for your first time today. This is so exciting.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to do this.
Well, you've got a beautiful presentation. I know you've got a lot of topics to cover. I'm so excited for our audience to hear from you. So I'm going to dip us in the background and let you get underway.
All right. All right. Hi, guys. Welcome to my talk. I'm going to be sort of talking about machine learning in space, sort of covering how I got interested in space and my journey into the space industry, then sort of introducing machine learning in general and how it's being used in the space industry. And then I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the research that I did throughout my master's degree and how it was related to the space industry. So first of all, I'd like to tell you all a little bit about me. So this is a photo of me at 5 years old, and I got to visit the Kennedy Space Center on a family trip. And I got to see all of the history of space, and we took this photo of me in front of the Saturn V rocket, which was used to send humans to the moon as part of the Apollo missions. And I just fell in love with space. I found it so cool, so interesting. I wanted to be an astronaut, the full 9 yards. And so as I got older, one of my hobbies sort of became building and launching model rockets. I would build them with my family, and then we would launch them in the winter on a frozen lake near my grandparents' house. And I learned that I didn't just like space itself, but also all of the technology and engineering that goes into space exploration and space travel. And I became really interested in robotics and rocketry, and I decided that when I got older, I wanted to go into engineering. So this brings us to more recently, where I completed an undergraduate degree in mechatronic systems engineering, and then a graduate degree in electrical engineering specializing in robotics. So for those of you who don't know, mechatronics is a combination of mechanical and electrical engineering, sort of with a focus on robotics. And I studied at Western University in London, Ontario, and I got to take so many cool courses and work on so many cool projects, including this robot that you see here, which is my capstone project that had a robotic arm that would pick up nodes that would transmit signals. So that was a very fun project that I got to work on. So I decided for my master's degree to continue on with Western University because they have a Western Space Institute. And I was able to do a planetary science specialization as part of my degree that allowed me to combine my love for robotics with my love for space. And I was able to take so many cool courses once again and have all these cool experiences, such as going on a field school and looking at all these different sort of planetary features, including visiting Meteor Crater in Arizona, which is where a meteor crashed into Earth and left this massive crater. This is also where I first learned about machine learning. I was able to take a course in it and learn how it can be used to solve so many problems, including in the space industry. And I ended up doing my graduate level research in machine learning and within the space industry. So now kind of what is machine learning? I'm sure it's kind of a really big topic right now. I'm sure you guys have heard of either ChatGPT or some other kind of either maybe you've heard it called artificial intelligence. So machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, which is a type of computer programming that allows for computers to mimic human intelligence and the way that humans think. So the goal is to program a algorithm inside of a computer that will then be able to solve problems the way that humans do. And often they would then be able to solve them faster than humans are able to. So at its core, machine learning involves training an algorithm. So it's a lot of math, just on lots and lots of data to allow the machine to learn what patterns are in the data. So that way, when they're presented with new data that it hasn't seen before, it can pick up the pattern and predict the output the way that a human would. So in this example here, this would be a classification problem where we are training the model to identify what the animal in the picture is. So we will train the model on a bunch of different images containing a bunch of different animals, and we will tell it what those animals are. We will say, this is a cat, this is a rooster, this is a deer, this is a squirrel, and the machine will then pick up the patterns and say, this is what makes a cat look like a cat. This is what makes a rooster look like a rooster. So when we then present it with a new image that it hasn't seen before, it can then go, that's a cat the same way that we would, because it can pick up the patterns about what makes a cat a cat. So for a machine learning model, you need a lot of training data, you need some testing data, and we keep improving the model to see if we can, get the right parameters to in the mathematical equation that will provide us with the best outputs. And there are many different types of machine learning models depending on the problem that you are trying to solve. So this example of a classification model is just one type. You can also say train a model to predict what the temperature outside would be. So you would collect your data based upon the historical temperatures that you've had. Okay, yesterday, it was, 18 degrees Celsius outside. And you would collect it for all the previous days and you would train the model and it would then be able to predict what the temperature should be either today or tomorrow. And you can improve the model, etc. So as I said, there are many different problems that you can solve with machine learning. And so here's sort of the general process for building and testing a machine learning model. As I said, first you have to collect a lot of data. This is sort of the main part of machine learning model is that it's only as good as the data that it's trained on. So you will have your training data, which is used to train the model, and your testing data, which is used to test the model and see how well it's performing. So then you will build a model depending on what output you are trying to achieve. So if you're trying to classify an image, you will build a model that will allow you to do that. So that's sort of there is a bunch of different types of models, and there's a bunch of different science that has gone into designing the best models depending on the problem. You will then train your model using training data that you have collected, and this is where the model will be able to pick up patterns and features within the data to sort of then be able to identify specific things in the future. We'll then get our initial results using our testing data. So this is data that the model has not seen before. And then we can see how well the model is performing by comparing the model's outputs to our ground truth from the testing data. And ground truth is what we know to be true. So if we have, we had a picture of a cat, we know that that is a photo of a cat. So if the model tries to tell us that's a photo of a dog, we know that it's wrong because we know it's a cat. So that is our ground truth. And we can compare and get the error as to how well the model is performing, comparing it to what we know to be true. If we like how the model is, performing, if it's on the right track, we can then move to tuning the model, which is where we're going to adjust the mathematical algorithm to see if we can optimize the results. And there are specific techniques that can be used to find which algorithm would be the best for these results. And then finally, we will once again test on our tuned model and see how well our model predicts compared to what we know to be the ground truth data of the data. And we'll repeat that as necessary, tuning the model as much as possible. Maybe we want to try a different model to begin with to see if that model performs better than our original model. And we'll just keep working with that to see if our model can predict with better and better accuracy. So as we said, that's kind of an overview of machine learning. And now there's a lot of different ways that machine learning can be used in space. So as machine learning models get better and better, more and more parts of the space industry are using machine learning to solve problems that are either very complicated or very tedious for humans to solve. So some ways that machine learning is being used is in rocketry and robotic navigation. So autonomous rovers that are on Mars and are driving around will be using machine learning to avoid colliding with objects. So they will be able to detect that there's a rock in front of them and plan accordingly to move out of the way. We'll also be using machine learning to control a rocket that is trying to hit a specific asteroid, and it will be able to automatically determine if it's on or off course and adjust accordingly. Data analysis is also a huge part of machine learning. As you can imagine, in the space industry, lots and lots of data is collected, and it's very difficult for humans to manually process that. So by training a machine learning model to process that data, we can get lots of really interesting results without having to manually go through all of the data that's collected. For example, you can train a model to identify the different types of rocks that are on Mars, or to identify planetary features like craters, and it will look through those images and automatically identify those interesting things so a human doesn't have to sit there and do it themselves. Additionally, there's also AI assistants that have been made. For example, on the International Space Station, there's one named Simon who is there to help the astronauts that are aboard the International Space Station and answer their questions. And basically, it's kind of like an Iron Man, where there's Jarvis is the AI assistant. This is a real life example of that that's been on board the International Space Station. Machine learning is also used to plan missions in terms of identifying when is the best time for a mission to occur by looking at all the previously collected data about whatever the mission target is and identifying this would be, the best time for our mission to occur. So I said there's a lot of ways in which machine learning is being used in the space industry. And this will kind of bring us into the research that I performed and how it relates to the space industry. So the Lunar Gateway is a space station that is being developed that is going to be orbiting around the moon. It's kind of a successor to the International Space Station, except for instead of orbiting around the Earth, it'll be orbiting around the moon. And it will also be really, really autonomous. So we want it to be able to operate without humans controlling it. And this includes its ability to repair itself. So the Canadarm3 is a robotic arm that is being built by Canadian company MDA, and it is the successor to the Canadarm2, which is on board the International Space Station currently. And the Canadarm has a lot of features, but one of its main functions is to repair the space station. So the Canadarm3 is being built for the same purpose for the Lunar Gateway, to repair whenever part of the exterior of the space station gets damaged. So since this space station will be operating autonomously, there needs to be a way to autonomously identify if a part of the space station is damaged, so that way the Canadarm will know that this needs to go and it needs to be repaired. So that's what my research was focusing on, was using machine learning as a way to identify damage and then be able to tell the Canadarm, hey, you need to go fix that. So how are we going to identify damage? First of all, we need to have our data. So the data type that are being used is called LiDAR, which stands for light detecting and ranging. And it's really fancy, but the main thing you need to know is it scans the object, and it will collect points. So we started by making a data set. You can see all of these points in a point cloud, and this is a simulated data set, not using an actual sensor, that would then simulate what the data that would be collected on the space station would look like. And to start with, we just started with simple objects because if a space station is very, very complex, but we want to be able to prove that the model works on simple objects, because if it doesn't work on simple objects, it's not going to work on complex objects. And so this was me sort of in that very first stage of the machine learning problem, creating all of our data. So the two types of data that I created were normal data and damaged data. So the normal data would be represented a completely fine, normal part of the space station. And we just created a simple object of like a computer model object, and then created a point cloud by taking sampling points along the surface of that object. So you can see how this partial point cloud is representing of a part of a cone. So part of the problem for identifying if the space station is damaged is we need to identify what part of the space station is the object looking at. So part of the model will need to identify what object is it looking at, and then we'll need to identify if it's damaged or not. So to do that, we need to have some damaged data as well. So for this problem, we don't know what damage is going to look like. It could be anything. It's undefined because we know what normal looks like, and damaged is anything that's not normal. So I just had some fun sort of randomly generating some surface damage on the objects. You can see sort of what that looks like in a point cloud, where you can still tell the shape of it is a pyramid, but it has a bunch of surface defects on it. It looks bumpy. It does not look normal. So the goal then will be for the machine learning model to identify and say, hey, that doesn't look the way that it's supposed to. I know what a pyramid is supposed to look like, and that does not quite look like a normal pyramid. So then how do we do that? As mentioned, there's sort of two parts to this problem. One is the classification, which is identifying what part of the spacecraft is the model looking at. For this, research, it would be what simple object is the model looking at. And we had 4 simple objects: a cone, a cube, a cylinder, and a pyramid. And we had these partial point clouds, and we were asking the model to say, what object is that? So you see in this point cloud, maybe you can tell it's part of a cube. And so the model would learn, it would train on a bunch of point clouds similar to this. So that way, when we presented it with a new one, it would say, I know that's a cube. I'm very confident that what I'm looking at here is a cube. The other part of the problem was identifying if the point cloud contained damage or not. And the way that we did that was by an anomaly detection method called reconstruction. So what we would do is we would design a model that then would reconstruct the original input, and we would see how well the model performed at that reconstruction. So this example here, we are training it on a bunch of normal data and asking it to reconstruct that data. So when it's reconstructing normal data, it's really, really good at reconstructing because it has been trained on a bunch of normal looking data. So when we have it to reconstruct a circle, it'll get really, really close to reconstructing a circle. But if we provide it with a random shape that it hasn't seen before, it is much worse at reconstruction because it hasn't seen that shape before, so it doesn't know how to reconstruct it properly. So that way we can compare the reconstructed shape to the original shape, and if the difference between them is really, really large, we can say that's damage. So that is sort of how we were able to detect damage by using machine learning model to reconstruct the original input and seeing how good at reconstruction it is. And if it was a really bad reconstruction, that must mean that was a damaged object. So I trained the model on that, I tuned it, and was able to get some really, really interesting and promising results. So these are confusion matrices, which compare, as we said, our ground truth data to our model's predicted data. So on the left, we have the classification matrix, which compares how well the model was at identifying if it's looking at a cone, a cube, a cylinder, or a pyramid. So you can see where it says the true label is 0 and the predicted label is 0. We had 1,107 correctly identified objects. So it performed really, really well in classification, classifying 97.93% of the objects tested correctly. The reconstruction also performed very well. As you can see in this data set, the normal point clouds without the ones that did not contain any damage were labeled 0, and the ones that had damage were labeled 1. And so as you can see, there are a lot more normal clouds, like objects, than there were damaged ones. And that's because damage is considered rare. It's not something that would happen a lot. So it's not going to be as common as just a normal object. So even with this, 90.42% of the damaged objects were correctly identified as damaged, which is really good because it is very important for us to not miss any of the damage or to miss as little of the damaged objects as possible. As you can see, there were quite a few of the normal objects that were falsely identified as damaged, where their true label was 0, but the computer predicted that it would be 1. And while that's not great, we will consider that still decently good because it's more important for us to sort of catch the damaged objects than it is to avoid falsely labeling a normal object as damaged. So with these results, we're able to kind of say that this is a valid method of detecting damage on the exterior of spacecrafts, and it could potentially, with further research, be used aboard the Lunar Gateway. So that kind of comes to what next for a research project like this. So the next part would be making a more complicated simulated data set. So that was just done with some simple objects in order to sort of prove to prove the possibility of this method working, and now we would want to test it on more complex objects. We'd also want to test on a data set using real-world data, so that data was simulated, but we would want to see how well it performs on data that is actually collected in the real world and not simulated on a computer. So that was a lot of information. I hope you found it very interesting. I want to say thank you guys for listening, and I would, of course, be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Katie. Again, it was a lot to go through, but you did a really nice job of highlighting that in a really easy to understand way. So we're going to dive in with questions. YouTubers, if you guys want to share in the chat, please do. Live classes, I'm going to come to you all in a second. Miss Neely, your devices are off, so you can share with me in StreamYard, and I'll relay questions to you, Katie. I'm going to start with one. So once we get to the stage of trying to actually train the arm, how long does that process take? Has there ever been an analog for this that you can go, okay, it takes 5 years to actually make this happen, or is this like completely uncharted territory for Canadarm3?
I would say I think it's definitely new. There have been, of course, maybe on a smaller scale of using the training models like this, but training large models in itself takes time. So for my research, which was sort of very small data set compared to what would be needed for a robotic arm like this, it took hours in order for a model to run and to train properly. So for the Canadarm3, where of course it's very intense program and it has a lot of research going into it, it would take a long time to train. But I know that the expected sort of launch date for the Canadarm3 is in a couple of years, and this is something that could theoretically maybe be implemented after it has launched. So
that's a good benchmark. I like that. So I knew we were going to get this question, and thank you, Miss Neely, for making it the first question. How much does Canadarm cost? Oh, this sounds very expensive to go to space and to have something that's this complex. Do you have I actually did look this up, but if you want to give a sense of it in advance, I don't know.
I would say I am not sure off the top of my head. My guess would be very expensive. Thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars would be my guess.
Yes. So our
Millions, sure.
Canadarm3 cost, Canadian Space Agency on Thursday announced Canadarm3 over its life cycle would cost $269 million. So about
there you go.
And it's worth noting, I always love this when we get space programs. Whenever we talk about space and the robotics that go into it, the complicated work that goes into it, we always get questions about cost. And I always like highlighting that, like NASA, whose budget is way more than Canadian Space Agency, it's about 4/10 of 1 penny on the dollar. So everything that NASA does, all the space missions, all the astronauts, all the exploring the cosmos is for 4/10, right? On every dollar of tax funding in the United States, and with all the discoveries we've made, all the discoveries on Earth that we've made from this. And so it does seem like a lot. $250 million is nothing to sneeze at. It's a lot of money. But with that, we'll be able to do decades of discovery in a really impactful way. We saw this with the James Webb Space Telescope that went up not too long ago, where the images it's produced have not only revolutionized science, but I mean, I have posters of the James Webb Space Telescope images on my wall because they're so extraordinary. And it's a really exciting time to be exploring space, where we're just starting to finally get back to a level of investment that we had back in the days of the moon launches in the 60s and 70s. So I'm glad we got that question. Miss Becker's class, I'm going to head to San Diego. If you guys want to dive in with a question, you are good to unmute your mic and come on in your very dark room. I like it. Hey guys, unmute. There we are.
I have a question. What happens if the system fails when you actually test it?
Yes, thank you for that question.
That's a great question. Yeah, so as we said, no machine learning model is perfect. You're not going to get a 100% accuracy. And so the best you can do is train and train and try and make your model as close to perfect as you can get, which is a very difficult task. So there were to be, of course, a lot of contingencies in place. So for example, in this case, if we're trying to observe damage on the space station, we would have to, maybe do multiple passes. We would look over the same area multiple times to see if, if we look over it a second time, would we be able to see damage that maybe we missed the first time? But there is always going to be the risk that you will miss something because, as I said, no machine will be perfect.
Yeah. I want to follow up on this with this model. So we're training an AI, we're getting the arm to be super autonomous when it needs to be on Lunar Gateway. To my knowledge, is not going to be crewed all the time. It's going to be crewed some of the time, right? So if the arm starts working and it says, oh, that's a mistake, that's something wrong, I need to fix that, and it goes to fix it and it's terribly wrong, it's made a terrible mistake, can people take over and stop the arm? Like, was that, or can the arm take over and take over the whole Lunar Gateway and take over the world? Like, is there that happening or not?
Yeah, no, humans will be able to control the Canadarm. It's not going to be completely autonomous. Part of it is, since it is, orbiting the moon, there will be times when, it is out of range of our signals. But whenever it's in range, it would be possible for humans to sort of intervene. So hopefully that's not a problem. And yeah, as you said, since the Lunar Gateway is not going to be crewed the entire time, it's important to have sort of those autonomous capabilities. Right.
Again, it's sort of uncharted territory. We've never done anything quite like this before, so it's really exciting to see how it all plays out. And we got a great question from Miss Neely's class. I will note too, Miss Taylor's group, if you guys want to chime in and unmute your mic, turn on your camera, I'll happily come to you. But Brighton Public School wants to know, what if the arm runs out of resources for repairing? And just in general, like, what is it drawing upon? Do we have a sense of, like, is there like a bank of, like, here's a panel that I can place on this thing to fix this meteorite damage? Or how does that even work in the repairing section of it?
Yeah, so we are continually, I can, sort of provide more examples with the International Space Station that has, been in operation since 2001, is that we're continually sort of resupplying the space station with resources that it needs. So if it's starting to run out of resources, we would then send out a supply run in order to resupply it with whatever sort of things it needs. And as far as I'm aware, yeah, I could literally be removing a panel and replacing it with a new one, or fixing, instead, anything that's, needs fixing. It kind of works like the way that a human arm would, but just with a lot more complicated stuff.
A lot more cool stuff going on.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, this is exciting too. As a Canadian, I know you got some American friends in the audience today, and you're used to, like, building big rockets and going to the moon and all this stuff. Canadarm's like our claim to fame, and we've got some really cool stuff in our last 2 iterations of Canadarm. They've been really instrumental in the space station, in the old space shuttles, that's the word I'm looking for, and beyond. So I encourage our Canadian audience especially to look up Canadarm. It's a really special project, and MDA is a very exciting company. You might not know this offhand, but I'm really curious, and we got this question via email. if there are video games that kids can play that incorporate AI in any way, or any AI for kids, basically. I know this is something that a lot of classes have been curious about over the last little bit. Anything that jumps out?
I personally do not know any of that. I'm sure there are. I mean, AI has been sort of a hot topic for the last little while. I know that there are some just sort of general programming, for kids in
Yeah.
classrooms. I'm not sure if there's one specifically targeted for AI though.
Fair enough. I will note on our end that Steam Labs has been a great partner of ours in doing some AI programming. In fact, they've got a really cool thing on the go with us right now. So if you want to check out Steam Labs, I'll be sure to put their info in the chat when we're done. And Miss Taylor's group. So you guys could turn your camera on if you want to, but I'll share it on behalf of our class in New Brunswick today. How long have individuals been working on Canadarm3? Like, how long a mission has this been? Do you know?
It's been going for a little while now, as far as long as sort of the Lunar Gateway has been in, production. The Canadarm has always sort of been really closely tied to the Lunar Gateway. So it's been, I want to say, for the past 5 years.
Yeah. I went on MDA site, the one I brought up on screen earlier, and I really encourage you to check this out. It's a really cool site, actually. So their key stats on this are 2014 is the year that MDA started doing early work on the Canadarm. 5 days is how long it will take to get to the Lunar Gateway from Earth. 2026 is the projected launch, which, by the way, so next year we get going back to the moon for the first time, or going around the moon. We get to be on the moon probably in 2025, and Lunar Gateway in 2026. So like a lot of cool stuff on the go. And just by comparison, I love highlighting this. International Space Station, I hope our students have had the chance to actually see it. You can actually look up every night and see the International Space Station with astronauts on it. Like no matter where you are in the world, you can look this up. The Lunar Gateway is going to be 1,000 times further from Earth than the International Space Station. So again, a supply run to go bring it stuff is a bit of a different logistical enterprise than anything we've actually attempted before, which is very exciting. Katie, are you bringing up any pictures? Sorry, I see you doing stuff with the slides in the background.
Sorry, no, I was just.
Oh, okay, cool. Miss Becker's class, we're going to head back to you guys. YouTubers, feel free to share a couple more questions. Time flies and you're having fun, so we are nearing the end of the broadcast. But Miss Becker, come on back in. Hey.
So when you were doing your presentation, I was looking at the meteor. When did it hit the Earth?
Ooh, the meteor crater, yeah.
Yeah, I would have to. So meteor crater, it hit the Earth like a long time ago. This was sort of, I have the information somewhere. I'm sorry, off the top of my head. But it was around the time there were humans in the area, but it was not. It was before, this current civilization as we know it.
Yes. So I'm looking this up as we speak because I didn't actually know this offhand. And Hira shared the Meteor Crater too. Meteor Crater is like a really iconic and incredible site. Like if you're ever in Arizona, it is a really special place to visit. I'm remiss because when I was in Arizona, I was like 50 miles away and I was like, oh, we've done so much. We were heading to the airport. I was like, So I need to go back just to see Meteor Crater. But 50,000 years is when we think that was formed. So our best understanding is that it's very recent. So again, there are people on Earth 50,000 years ago, and it's such a perfect crater. Like that's part of the thing too, is that nothing's had the chance to fill it in. There are craters actually in Ontario, where some of our classes are tuning in from today, that are way bigger than Meteor Crater, but over millions of years they've filled in with rocks and other sediments, and so you don't see them as like this perfect crater anymore, which is super cool. So thank you for sharing that. Miss Taylor's group, unmute your mic. Come on in, guys. Share away, grade 4s. Hi. Let's see. Do you have a question for us? Come on, mute your mic. There we are.
Hello.
Hi.
What do you like most about your job?
Yes. What do you like most, Katie?
I have just really, really enjoyed problem solving. That was always been what I've enjoyed most. And space and engineering, it's all about problem solving. It's finding the most interesting problems and figuring out, cool and unique ways to sort of solve those problems. So that's what kind of drew me into engineering, and space is just cool. It's just so cool. So that's kind of, it's not more complicated than that.
Pretty cool. Well, and this is actually a really good message. And I always like highlighting this for students before I lead into our final question. And that is the idea that, when you're young, when you're your age, I mean, both Katie and I were lucky to sort of know what we wanted to do from that age. But if there's something that you love to do, maybe it's history, maybe it's books, maybe it's art or dance or whatever, follow that. Do that as much as you possibly can. And quite often that will lead to some really exciting opportunities in your life. And sometimes maybe end up doing cool AI stuff for robots that are going to space, which is like the coolest possible pinch yourself daily end game of early childhood passion. For our grade 4 through 7s today, who might be super keen to get involved in space, to do something like you're doing, what would you recommend that they do as they continue on through school? Any specific courses, anything that you can recommend to keep the learning going?
I would say if you're interested in robotics and everything, often looking to see if your school has a robotics program or like an after-school robotics club. If you're interested, I would say look into taking computer programming if your school offers that, and also just exploring like extracurriculars if you can. Like I said, like I got really into model rocketry. That was sort of when I was in elementary school. That was what I found very interesting. And so if you can, maybe explore that, or robotics, or just sort of test and see what you're interested in, and if you like it, and if you want to continue learning about it.
Keep the passion going. It's our favorite message, no matter what the topic might be. And so, Katie, thank you so much for this very enthusiastic broadcast. It's such a thrill having you. Again, I really encourage your audience, check out the Canadarm3 website. Check out Lunar Gateway. NASA's got some incredible stuff there. And if you ever get the chance to go to Florida and see the Kennedy Space Center in person, I have stood in that exact spot by that Saturn V rocket. There's no picture can possibly do that justice. It is like the coolest thing to see on Earth. It's very, very neat. Katie, what we do to wrap up every broadcast, I'm going to bring in our classes to say a big thank you and farewell. We got Miss Becker's class like already chomping at the bit here, but Miss Taylor's class, if you guys want to unmute your mic, Miss Becker's in California, Miss Neely at home, thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, guys.